Well, last year, Scotland became the first part of the UK to ban smacking. Opponents of the ban argued that changes would do nothing to help vulnerable children who were the victims of serious physical abuse, but could cause traumatic interventions in good families who use discipline such as a smack on the bottom or the wrist. There are currently no plans for England or Northern Ireland or Wales to follow Scotland in an outright ban, but should there be? Is this a wise intervention to protect children, or is it an example of the state sticking its nose into how we raise our children? To debate this, I'm delighted to welcome Jo Hemmings, a behavioural psychologist. Hello, Jo. And Dr. Stewart Waiton, a senior lecturer in sociology and criminology at Abertay University and a campaigner at the organisation Be Reasonable. Stewart, I'll come to you shortly, but let me start, if I can, with you. Jo Hemmings, why do you think that a tap on the wrist is so harmful?
I think any form of smacking, firstly, it's been shown to be ineffective as a punishment. Secondly, every single piece of evidential research would point to the fact that it can be damaging to a child. If they're frequently smacked, either in cognitive ability, in terms of their own aggression, social interaction. There's nothing, I can see nothing in terms of research at all that says a smack is ever effective in any way, but could potentially be damaging, whether it's a slap on the wrist, smack on the bottom, I don't care. It's unacceptable and archaic these days.
Jo, I'll never forget the time when my youngest son stepped out into the road, and clearly, that's every parent's worst nightmare, and luckily there wasn't a car that was too close by. But he faced peril, and I deliberately and roughly manhandled him back onto the pavement. Now, I could have just gently moved him back to the pavement. I didn't. I tugged him over as a sort of physical message that what you've done there was potentially fatal, and I wanted him to remember that. Now, I would have thought that that is somewhere within the spectrum of a smack.
Yes, it is, but I 100% agree with you. I did the same to my own child once, who was feeding carpet tacks into another baby's mouth. And I grabbed him and I slapped him because I could see the danger. So it's the danger, and you react. Of course, it's fight or flight. You've got to grab your child away, and you need to remind them it's terrifying, potentially fatal behaviour. And that was the only time I ever smacked them. And I think that possibly is an understandable reaction when you're protecting your child or another child. It is a visceral response, but it doesn't work as a punishment. This is we're talking danger here. We're talking putting your child's life or another child's life in mortal danger. Of course, like your child crossing the road and not doing it. They won't forget that in a hurry. But as a general punishment, as a discipline for being naughty, it doesn't feel right at all anymore, and there is no evidence suggests anything positive about it whatsoever.
Dr. Stewart Waiton, you're a senior lecturer in sociology and criminology at Abertay. What's your view on this?
Well, I thought what Jo said there was fascinating. It's like a bag of contradictions. So every bit of research, well, she could go and read a lot of Robert Larzelia's research, which says the opposite to what she's saying, but there you go. And then I love the fact that a lot of policies and moral positions today are kind of hide behind this idea of research. But at least Jo then comes out and says it's unacceptable and archaic, which is her kind of moral position. And then she admits to smacking her own child, which means she's obviously archaic as well. So the problem with this in Scotland is that you already had a law against, you could have reasonable chastisement. But what you couldn't have was severe beating of your children and so on, where you treat children badly. So what they've done in Scotland is make that a criminal offence, or make Jo a criminal. So Jo in Scotland could be arrested. She could be seen as a child abuser. She could lose her job. And millions of other parents like her could be similar. And when you look at what parents in the public...
Stewart, I could have got reported for dragging my son back onto the pavement, roughly.
quite possibly. So we could all, and if you asked the public in Scotland, which happened during when the law was changing, 75% of the public disagreed with the idea that should be a criminal offence. Understandably, they think it's ridiculous, but it now is a criminal offence, so we can now potentially be criminalising parents who are loving, who occasionally might use light forms of chastisement, physical chastisement. And unfortunately, it's experts like Jo that are helping to push through this horrible, authoritarian, distrusting type of policy where we criminalise everything, which links back to your last item. I mean, this is the thing I'm interested in as a criminologist, the fact that essentially we are policing everyday life. I mean, I'm trying to write a book called The Criminalization of Everything. And this is just another example of it. Every week we seem to have a new law, a new initiative, a new policy that treats people with real contempt and starts to criminalize everyday behavior. It's a very dangerous and authoritarian situation to be in.
And it doesn't trust individuals or families, does it, Stewart? However, just to back up Jo Hemmings, you could argue that this, which we can agree is innocuous, is the thin end of the wedge. And if you have a zero-tolerance policy to any kind of assault on your child, then they are safer.
Yes,
well,
look,
not
Stewart.
necessarily safer. Sorry, I don't know who you're asking.
Jo, I just want to put that to Stewart, and I'll come straight back to you, Jo. What do you think, Stewart? Thin end of the wedge?
Well, your child wouldn't have been safer, and the child that Jo's child was playing with wouldn't have been safer. It's a very patronising zero tolerance. Basically means zero judgment. That's what it means. It's a mindless approach to people that just sees it's a really horrible, fear-filled perception of people. You know, a parent who smacks their child a bit is going to lead on to beating their children and all the rest of it. We just know that isn't true, right? We just know it's not true. And it's this unworldliness of these so-called experts, which is so phenomenal, that how anybody even listens to this so-called research, which just doesn't really connect with people's lived experience at all.
Jo Hemmings?
Well, I've seen Stewart do this before. I've seen him on TV. He's a seasoned professional, a protector of smackers. He's done this thing before with his hand many, many times. And he's come across people like me many, many times. So he's very good at this. However, he's actually showing me contempt because I'm not a so-called expert. The evidence out there is very clear for anybody to see. If you want to abuse and hurt your child, we should never have a conversation about a smacking ban, because most people with a shred of intelligence or common sense would learn to control their impulses and not smack their children. It's about the parent. It's not about the child. It's about you losing it and you disciplining your child because you can't contain your anger. It's in no way ever you present me with the research that ever has said it is beneficial as a punishment to hit your child.
Well, Jo, I wonder,
I've already said that.
If you think about where parents who are not abusive will smack their child, it might be a tap on the wrist. It might be a slap on the bottom. The bottom, by some distance, the least sensitive part of the human body, which is why I would imagine that for centuries that's where mums and dads have chosen to strike their child, because they seek no harm. Isn't ultimately the threat of a tap on the wrist something that's an important piece of toolery, a tool in the armoury of any parent? It's something that, if you keep this up, you're going to get a slap on the wrist. It's the threat of it rather than the actual execution.
Both are ineffective. So the truth is, what is a smack? Is it a gentle tap on the wrist, as Stewart likes to play it out? Is it a slap on the face? That's rather different to a smack on the bottom.
That's
it's
already illegal.
It's physical punishment for naughtiness. Now, either you reason with your child, you talk to your child, you discipline your child. I don't think there's a place in 2021 for physical. It is an assault on your child. Stewart will laugh at me. I'm sure he will. Here goes another, neoliberal parent psychologist. There is no evidence suggests that it works even as a punishment. It's ineffective. Cognitive abilities are
Jo, I'm going to come back to Stewart in a second, but one final thought with you with the clock against us. The issue we've got, and I think the issue that Stewart Waiton has, is that this law and criminalising the tap on the wrist lets the real abusers off the hook, as cops are busy arresting innocent, loving families for, a very sort of minor, intrusion on the child, whilst the real crimes happen behind closed doors. The ultimate issue with these sorts of laws, Jo, is that the cops will be going after the wrong people.
Don't get me wrong, I do not agree with a ban. I think anybody with any common sense and any knowledge and any true love and care for their child would know that it's an ineffective punishment. It's quite damaging to a child. We should never be talking about banning it. It shouldn't even come to that.
So you think the law in Scotland is wrong, Jo?
I do think it's wrong. I think people need to realize where we are in this day and age, and that smacking is not only cruel, abusive, it's ineffective, it's pointless. Get with 2021. It's, as I said, an archaic, ineffective form of punishing your child because of your own issues.
Well, Dr. Stewart Waiton, last words to you with the clock against us.
Well, I just think these things are not very significant. Parents who love their children, who occasionally smack them as a form of discipline, it's neither here nor there. It's really not a big deal. Unfortunately, we have professionals who are helping to undermine parental authority and making a big deal out of this. And eventually, unfortunately, with these arguments, you do lead to the criminalisation of parents where they're seen as being abusers when actually they're just trying to look after their kids and do the best they can. It's part of the politics we have at the minute, and it leads to authoritarian solutions, unfortunately.
A very enlightening conversation. My deep thanks to the behavioural psychologist, Jo Hemmings. Thank you, Jo. And my thanks to Dr. Stewart Waiton, a senior lecturer in sociology and criminology at Abertay University and a campaigner at the organisation Be Reasonable.